Hello, and thank you for joining us for today's virtual education program at Cancer Support Community South Bay. I'm Rebecca, the program manager, and I welcome you to this workshop titled Empowering Yourself During and After Cancer Treatment. Before we begin, if this is your first time joining us, CSC South Bay's mission is to ensure that all people impacted by cancer are empowered by knowledge, strengthened by action, and sustained by communities so that no one faces cancer alone. We serve the South Bay, Long Beach, Orange County area all at no cost. Our program includes support groups, networking groups, healthy lifestyle classes, social activities, and educational programs like this workshop. Educational workshops are open to all. If you'd like to hear more about our services or join a community, please visit our website at cscsouthbay.org. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our workshop speakers. Brittany Rudinica is a licensed clinical social worker, oncology social work certified at Torrance Memorial Medical Center, Hunt Cancer Institute. She also teaches mindfulness, yoga, and breathwork in the South Bay. Susan Starr is an oncology nurse practitioner at the Hunt Cancer Center and the director of Integrative Oncology, Torrance Memorial Cancer Care. Thank you so much for both of you for being here with us today.
Thank you so much, Becca, and welcome everybody. We really appreciate you taking the time out of your middle of your day to be with us. We hope that this presentation makes you feel good and equipped and ready to go by the end of it. So I'm going to share my screen in just a moment. Here. All right. There we go. Looking okay, Becca?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. So our presentation today, Empowering Yourself During and After Cancer, is intended for really anybody that's been impacted by cancer at any stage of their journey, whether you're just starting your journey, whether you're done with treatment, whether you're going to be on treatment for the whole duration beyond, or whether you're completely done with treatment and you just want to find ways to continue to take good care of yourself. So again, as Becca mentioned, Susan and I both work within the Torrance Memorial Systems. I am an oncology social worker, outpatient cancer center, and Susan works in our cancer care office. We both have backgrounds in integrative health as well, so we're very passionate personally and professionally about not only going to your doctor's office and taking the medicine, obviously being responsible and doing what's told, but we want to empower you to know that there is much more in your control than you may even realize. I know that I personally find that when I work with people, when they feel like they are at the whim of their circumstance, that decisions are being made outside of them, they feel like they're being told what to do versus feeling like they can make an impact at some point in their decisions and care. I notice very different mental health outcomes, from my opinion, of the people that take charge and the people that just kind of feel overwhelmed and a victim to the circumstance. So the intention today is to make you kind of feel the ones that are equipped to take charge. So today I'm going to be talking to you about a psychological concept called locus of control, which will hopefully pump you up to get excited that there are different ways of approaching stress and stressful situations and health diagnoses, for example. Susan is going to pop in and she's going to review integrative and lifestyle medicine recommendations during and post-treatment. So that'll be a meat of the presentation, giving you some great things to think about. I am going to follow up with some mind-body coping skills and talking about the power of choosing your attitude to help your mental health outcomes. And hopefully at the very end, will allow you to walk away to commit to some baby steps to getting moving in a new positive direction. So here I just wanted to briefly note, I think that just to conceptualize what we're going to be talking today, to tap into your motivation levels of why this is important. There's this concept that you could kind of fall into two buckets of when you have a stressful situation that happens, that comes up, such as cancer, such as something no one planned for. There are people that fall into the bucket of feeling that, hey, this happened and it's horrible, and I can make things happen. I can do things. I feel equipped. Look what I can accomplish. So in the concept of the internal locus of control, it's an internal, core internal belief that you believe that outcomes are within your control. That is actually very important. Again, mindset, we know for cancer survivorship and treatment is huge, not only just for mental, but also physical outcomes as well as treatment adherence. It's important to believe that what you're doing is actually helping. Versus when people may have an external locus of control, you believe the outcomes are outside of your control. I was just looking at a research article from Poland that noticed that in clinical practice, for example, the attitudes of patients that think that situations are happening to them, that experience disease as punishment, injustice, malicious fate, they may avoid confrontation with the diagnosis, and they do not accept the disease, and they may not even undertake treatment. So that's what we don't want to happen. We don't want you to get lost in the very common reaction of, why did this happen? What's the point? Everything, bad things are just happening to me. We want to get you out of that mentality, but I do want to emphasize that most people breeze through this place. So if it's you, don't feel bad. We're just trying to get you going in the right direction. So your locus of control is a lot about how you view the world and your role in determining the course of your life. So I just want to highlight that the way you conceptualize things, probably there's a history to it. It's probably been for a very long time, but I do want to let you know that there are some ways of getting around that. So again, don't need to talk too much about psychological concepts. I just think it's important for you to know that there are choices. For example, I found a beautiful article about cancer patients and those who actually were doing well, right? We could talk about people that aren't doing as well, but who are the ones that were doing well? So some of the qualities are that they actually do things to improve their situation, seek different opinions, ask a lot of questions, they're inquisitive, they research, they develop their knowledge, their skills, abilities, seek reputable information. This is very important looking towards the future. Sometimes when we're in a state of panic and survival mode, we forget that there will be more to look forward to, ways that it is worth our time to invest in our health and our well-being. They set goals for themselves and speak in the positive. So, for example, I have no choice, there's nothing I can do, is usually going to not help mentally, but also your ability to follow through with treatment, as well as with your ability to boost your outcomes through what Susan is going to talk about in just 1 minute here. I want to leave you with this. Dr. Viktor Frankl, who was a psychiatrist, actually was a prisoner of war himself in the Holocaust. He studied resiliency, and he learned that attitude and people's reactions to any horrific situation actually determine their survival outcome. So in A Man's Search for Meaning, it's an incredible book. That book informed a certain psychotherapy for cancer patients developed out of Memorial Sloan Kettering Hospital, meaning-centered psychotherapy, which is basically, I was trained in it, and it teaches people to look at what they can control, what meaning they could find through suffering, what depth can they find, kind of like silver linings, but essentially like what's a different way of looking at things. And the theory is that meaning is more in mentality, but meaning never ceases to exist. We could always find meaning. Just leaving you with this quote: everything can be taken from a man, but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, and to choose one's own way. So with that, Susan.
Thanks, Brittany. And thanks everyone for joining in today. So I'm talking about something that I'm very passionate about and really love to share with my patients in my practice here at the Hunt Cancer Center. And, it's really about helping people have control over their lives and their decisions. And so often when patients are diagnosed with cancer and they're in the doctor's office, they feel like they're completely out of control. And there are a lot of things that you can do to keep some of that control and work with your medical team. And that's what I'm hoping I can convey and share with you today. So I think through the lens of integrative medicine and lifestyle medicine, that I think is an important way to kind of help structure the things that I feel that people can have control over in their life. And so integrative medicine, for those of you who may not know, it uses all appropriate therapies, both conventional, which most people refer to as Western medicine, and complementary medicine, which can be Chinese medical, or like acupuncture, Chinese medicine, or Ayurvedic type medicine, to facilitate the body's innate healing response. So allowing ourselves to get to the root cause or root problems of something going on. It neither rejects conventional medicine nor accepts alternative therapies uncritically. So it's really combining the two, the Western medicine as well as complementary ideas and modalities to help people to feel better and to improve their symptoms. Lifestyle medicine is important, I think, to bring in this because it has these 6 pillars that focus on nutrition, physical activity, stress management, restorative sleep, social connections, and avoiding risky substances like smoking and drinking alcohol, things of that nature. So it's really kind of looking at our whole body in terms of how we can best function and be our best physical and mental state. I just want to quickly just share a personal experience of witnessing self-empowerment. When I was 20, I was a caregiver for my mother who had breast cancer. And in fact, most of my childhood life was with her working or dealing with her breast cancer, as she was diagnosed when I was 5, and again when I was 15, and again when I was 20. But it was when I was 20 years old that I really was able to witness what she did on her end through her whole cancer journey. And it was fascinating, and it was really poignant to me that at that time when I would look at her calendar, because now I'm her caregiver, and I would see all these appointments, medical appointments, procedures, and imaging, and all of these things. But then she also had on her calendar this other checklist, which was going for a walk at 10 o'clock with Susan, or having a friend come over for an afternoon, hour just to touch base, to drinking, having me pick up a fruit shake that she had heard about from some local healthy store, to making, a vegetable soup that night. She just had this list of things and all that was nutrition and exercise and its social connectedness, and her prayer list of praying for things for herself and for others. And so that was really powerful to me to witness the importance of, from a patient standpoint, having all these things were all in her control: how she ate, how she exercised, how she prayed and did her spiritual life, as well as in another page of all the questions for her doctor next time she saw them. So she was really, really very active in taking control of her life, and just witnessing that, I think, really helped me to bring that into my practice as a nurse practitioner, of really trying to help empower people to, these are all the things that you can do outside of what we're doing here in the clinic. So the things that are potentially, that can be in your control is nutrition, how and what you eat. Now, this is difficult if you're in the midst of chemotherapy or treatment, because you might not be feeling well, but you still have some control, whether it's the nausea meds we give you, or doing essential oils or things of that nature to help make sure you're getting in good nutrition, or making certain kinds of shakes. If you're after cancer therapy or on long-term cancer therapy, then you can really focus on nutrition overall, which will go into more details about what that would include and what that would look like. As we know, nutrition is a really important part of feeling better and reducing cancer recurrence. Exercise, activity, movement. So whether it's full exercise at the gym, or it's going on a walk with your grandchild, or it's baking a cake if you have the energy for that, or whatever the case may be, but you're moving and you're staying active is really important. So sleep health, and that may not seem like that's something that's in your control, but it often can be. And we'll talk about the things, the ways in which you can help improve your overall sleep. Stress management is a big one, and we'll also talk about that, how you can be more in control of managing your stress from a variety of different techniques. Mindfulness and breath work, which Brittany will go over that a little bit more in the end of the lecture. Social network, family, relationships. If you're someone that loves people around, have them come around and be with you and help you, or whether it's going to your church. If you're someone where that creates more anxiety to be with a lot of people, then have a schedule and limit how many people are coming over or calling, not to overexhaust yourself. Do what's best for you ultimately in terms of having that social network, however big or however small, whatever that looks like for you. Ask your referrals when you're going into your doctor's appointments, your NP appointments. there's all kinds of things that you can be self-referred for or ask for a referral, and I'll mention that as well. And then also what's in your control is engaging in complementary therapy. So whether it's acupuncture or sound baths, I know there's a great place in the South Bay here that some people go to, or being involved with Tai Chi and Qigong, which I know the cancer support community has classes for that, or aromatherapy. All of these things are things that you can do to help with these various things that we're talking about. So with regards to nutrition, the American Cancer Society puts a statement out saying nutritional assessment and counseling should begin as soon as possible after diagnosis, with the goal of preventing or resolving nutrition deficiencies, preserving muscle mass, and managing side effects of treatments that may adversely affect nutritional status. In my perfect world, everybody diagnosed with cancer would have an immediate nutritional one-on-one assessment with a dietitian, because I just feel that is so important from the standpoint of really focusing on what the best proteins are to get for your body, the best calories for yourself to either maintain or lose or gain weight, depending on what kind of therapy you're on. And then it just helps you to tolerate your treatment better. And then we also know after cancer therapy, the importance of nutrition in terms of maintaining weight and reducing cancer recurrence. So this is something that should be really addressed straight away when someone's diagnosed and continue to be discussed throughout the entire trajectory or treatment or lifetime for somebody for that matter. Dietary recommendations, I'm picking really the main recommendation would be the Mediterranean diet. And there was a study last year in 2023 that showed that this Mediterranean diet reduces the risk of all cause and cancer mortality. So not just cancer, but all cause. So it's really good for everybody. And Mediterranean diet, as probably most of you know, includes fish, lean meat, olive oil, fresh vegetables and fruit, whole grains, legumes, nuts, seeds, healthy fats. It's also avoiding processed foods, added sugar, refined grains, and too much alcohol. So this diet is probably the best way in general. Everyone's different in terms of focusing on that kind of diet. Now, if again, you're in the midst of chemotherapy, it's a little bit different. It might be hard to eat certain things. You might not have the taste for fish. And this is where it gets a little bit more nuanced and individualized, and where it's important to talk to your nurse practitioner or to a dietitian to help make those adjustments based on the symptoms that you're having. But definitely after cancer therapy or for those on long-term therapy, this is really probably the most ideal general diet frame to follow. I mentioned the DASH diet, which is basically the diet for hypertension, to reduce hypertension. So if you see a cardiologist or your primary doctor and they recommend the DASH diet, it's essentially the Mediterranean diet, very similar to that. But I mention it here because there was a study a week ago that just came out showing that those who ate the DASH diet, this was associated with significantly reduced risk of cardiovascular disease among patients with breast cancer. So what's interesting here is the diet for low blood pressure is also the diet for cancer reduction and overall cancer health. And then the diabetic diet, same thing. What do you see there? Fruits, vegetables, lean meats, plant-based protein, less added sugar, less processed foods. So there definitely is a similar theme between all three of these diets. And I think a lot of times it's difficult because people are kind of separating them all into different kinds of diets, but really over the umbrella, they're all very similar and a lot of crossover. So whatever you're doing to help reduce cancer, you're also helping reduce the risk for diabetes, for heart disease. It's important to kind of look at it as all encompassing that way. So eating a healthy eating pattern includes, eating foods that are high in nutrients and in amounts that help achieve and maintain a healthy body weight. Eating a pound of nuts is probably not good, and it's too much of that vitamin or mineral or calories. Eating 2 almonds and walnuts is probably not giving you enough omega-3s and vitamin E and the minerals and vitamins that are in those nuts. So it's really having that, the right amount, like a handful of nuts every day, for example, reduces colon cancer recurrence. Eating a variety of vegetables and fruit, so that you want to get all the colors of the rainbow. And I know everyone's heard that before, but that I think is one of the most important things. So when you're leaving a grocery store or checking out, if you order online, you want really all the colors of the rainbow in your basket, and you want to try to eat them every day as much as you possibly can. And little things like if you're making scrambled egg one day, throw in a handful of spinach to cook it down in, or if you're making a shake, throw in a handful of kale just to get extra colors and nutrients and fiber into any meal you're making throughout the day, and just sprinkling it in throughout the day rather than just separating it as a side vegetable or a salad is one way to incorporate these things in. One example of something that I do to try to get all the different kind of nutrients and minerals in is I go to Trader Joe's and I buy all the different seeds and nuts that don't have any salt or sugar added to them. And I have them all in their own little clear jar on a wall of shelves that I've hammered into the kitchen. And if I feel, when I'm sprinkling some pine nuts on, a salad, I know I'm getting some zinc. If I'm sprinkling some almonds on an oatmeal, I know I'm getting some extra vitamin E. If I know I'm sprinkling walnuts or flax seeds, I'm getting some more omega-3s. So just looking at your food as medicine and really notice, and every day on your oatmeal, on your salad, on your yogurt, sprinkle some kind of different seed, some kind of different nut, just as an easy way to get different kind of minerals and nutrients. So adding whole fiber-rich legumes, beans, and peas and nuts, which I just mentioned. Whole grains, obviously that's the brown and wild rice, which have the most bang for the buck over, like a white rice, but oats, quinoa, wheat berries, amaranth, kamut, bulgur, those bottom three maybe aren't as common for people. Expand your horizons and go to Sprouts and buy those and work with them. You cook them just like any other grain and just to try different things in your diet. So these are all things you have control over, really trying to look at food as medicine and bringing them in different ways, different colors and fiber, and to give you a better nutritional status during your treatment as well as after. And I think the important thing here too is avoid the red and processed meats. We know that processed meats is a carcinogen associated with cancer development. So you really want to avoid those as much as possible, avoiding sugar sweetened beverages, high processed foods, and refined grains. You want to eat more fresh food than packaged foods. I tell my patients, eat from the earth. Whatever grows from the earth, eat that, number one first. And packaged, of course, we can't get away entirely from not having packaged foods, but you want to try to limit packaged foods as much as possible and reduce processed foods as much as possible as well. So nutrition is in your control to be able to fine tune and find the best kind of eating pattern for yourself. And again, if you're someone through treatment or you have active, if you have diabetes that's not controlled, please always consult with your medical provider or your endocrinologist or a dietitian. So moving on to physical activity. So the American Cancer Society's statement on this is physical activity assessment and counseling should begin as soon as possible after diagnosis, with the goal of helping patients prepare for treatment, tolerate and respond to treatments, and manage cancer-related symptoms and treatment-related side effects. So again, so important from day one. And again, in my perfect world of a cancer center, everyone diagnosed with cancer would immediately see a physical therapist or an exercise therapist to evaluate what their current status is and to help them come up with a personalized goal and plan for themselves in terms of how to maintain energy and muscle mass during treatment. Now, everyone's different here as well. So this is important, again, to meet with your medical provider or get a referral to physical therapy. But it's really important to do some kind of exercise, and it doesn't have to be an hour every day. It can be a 10-minute walk once or twice a day. It can be 5 minutes of lifting some light weights or something, but some kind of movement or exercise is important to do throughout your cancer therapy. And then once you're done with cancer therapy, or again on some kind of chronic long-term therapy, really important to have a regular exercise routine, which we can talk more about in a moment. Also, I want to mention, in my perfect world, everyone would meet with a social worker right away as well to do mindfulness and stress reducing type of activities, because that's so important. So exercise during after therapy, what does it do for you? I mean, there's a whole list of things here. I mean, and more. Decreases anxiety and depression. So that's where even just being outside in the sun, if the sun is out, or just that kind of movement can help with those things. Improves physical function and improves quality of life. It improves fatigue. There's been clinical trials showing regular exercise every day for those on cancer therapy have better fatigue or report less fatigue. Upper body exercises helps reduce lymphedema. Exercise. For years, we were afraid of having people do anything with their arm, but now that we know regular upper body exercise is actually important for that collateral circulation and reducing lymphedema. But it improves cardiovascular output. So your cardiologist is going to like this. If you see your cardiologist, what do they probably, well, they should be also telling you, regular exercise is important for good heart function. It improves and prevents osteoporosis. So for those of you on aromatase inhibitors, we might give you Zometa here in the clinic or Prolia or some other medication, but what you can do on your own is weight-bearing exercise and resistance training. And that actually is shown to be more beneficial in terms of bone mass development than a lot of these medications that we give. It reduces risk for blood clots, so that movement is good circulation. It helps your pulmonary function. It helps your bowel function. Anyone with any constipation, the 3 key things: good hydration, good fiber, and walking or activity. If we're sedentary, it slows down the movement of our gut, so it can help with your bowels as well. It improves your sleep. It improves chemo brain. There's clinical trials showing that there's improvement in cognition in those who have regular exercise or do regular exercise. It reduces hot flashes, and it obviously helps lose or maintain weight. So the list is endless, and I can't emphasize enough how important exercise is. And exercise is not just going to the gym, which I know for me, I'm not a gym person. I like variety. I'm looking for any way to not have to necessarily go to the gym. So of course you have traditional exercise, which is going to the gym, lifting weights, running, walking, biking. But then you also have the mind-body exercises. So yoga, tai chi, qigong, again, a lot through the cancer support community and a lot of free stuff online. I have, I'm YouTube. It's a Pilates course with this called Move with Nicole, and I think she's in Australia. And she has a bunch of different classes that are 5 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour, and different yoga, stretching, Pilates. And what I love about it is I don't always have a lot of time for exercise, but I have 10 minutes, so I can go on and just go to her ones that are 10 minutes only and get some kind of exercise in before I start my day if possible, and then do the longer ones on the weekend. So YouTube has a lot of great free exercise classes in addition to the cancer support community or wherever you're going currently. So working and chores, and I know some people don't always look at this as exercise, but I do. If it's moving, I see it as exercise. So using a stand-up desk at your work, either you work at home or at an office, if you can get a stand-up desk and work most of the time, that's a big improvement. Cleaning your house, washing your car, gardening, cooking, just move. Movement is key. You don't want to be sitting as much as possible and be active. And of course, look at fun activities, whether it's dancing or Zumba or hiking or traveling. If you're traveling, you're doing more walking and movement. So find ways that it makes activity fun and do a variety. If you're not just a gym rat like I do, I'd like to do a lot of different things. It keeps it more interesting for me. So the recommendation is for cardio and resistance training, 150 to 300 minutes per week. So however you calculate that out, as long as you get to a minimum of 150, up to 300. If you do rigorous activity where you're really sweating, you can get by with 75 minutes. But I do want to make the point here that it's cardio and resistance training. So although walking is good, lifting weights is going to be better in terms of a resistance training for that, building that muscle mass and that bone mass. And specifically, focusing on a little bit more heart rate up. Again, I love walking. Walking's good, but if you can kick your heart rate up a little bit more and you can do some kind of more resistance training, that's taking you to the next level to really help with these things we've talked about. So engage in regular activity as able, move more, sit less. I think one of the most recent quotes I've heard, and I love just sitting, is the new smoking, because we are just seeing that the more we sit and the bigger we're getting as a country, that is actually almost equivalent to smoking and its cause of lung cancer. So really being up and moving and trying to avoid being sedentary is just key during treatment as well as after treatment. All right, well, a couple more slides and I'll get back to Brittany. So for sleep health, so these are the recommendations overall to really help improve or manage sleep. So you do have control over this. And I know a lot of people just want that Ambien or some medication, but it's really important to try to do all these things to get better sleep. So good nutrition is going to be helpful. So if you're eating, a lot of sugar and processed foods, and that just is not good for a good balance, and that can affect your sleep-wake cycle. You want to avoid or reduce alcohol as much as possible. Or if you're going to drink, other than keeping it limited, have it earlier in the evening versus later at night, because that's a big impact on sleep. And that drinking alcohol in more volume and later in the evening will impact sleep, as well as kick up hot flashes for a lot of postmenopausal women as well. Avoiding or limiting caffeine as much as possible and having it in the morning, and really truly avoiding it in the afternoon as much as possible. Regular exercise can be helpful for sleep. So again, you have control over all these things to make your sleep better. Again, try to avoid exercising at night if possible. You want to do it in the daylight hours. Don't eat 3 hours before bed if possible, because once you're eating, you're kicking up glucose in your body, making your pancreas work, and so you're not really having a restful sleep because your organs are working processing that food. You want to try to get that in 3 hours before bed. Meditation, breath work such as 4-7-8 breathing, box breathing, which Brittany will go over a little bit more, and stretching before bed all helps promote a good night's sleep ahead and kind of getting your mind frame ready for sleep. If you're doing a bunch of stuff before sleep and you have the lights on and you're busy and you're thinking and you're working, that's not going to set you up for a good night's sleep. Music therapy, that's important for me because music is always very calming. So if it's calming for you, that would be a good thing to do. And it doesn't have to be super calm music, even if it's a little bit more upbeat, just something that makes you feel good and distracts you from thinking about the day and getting into a space of kind of peace and quiet, whatever works for you. There are studies that show that Tai Chi and Qigong can be helpful for sleep. So again, whether you do it on a YouTube video or through the cancer support community, those things, those activities can be helpful and promote good sleep. You want to aim for 8 hours every night. You want to avoid long or frequent naps. If you're a big napper, put a timer on. Don't let yourself sleep more than 30 minutes or 40 minutes, and try to avoid more than one a day if you're a napper. You really want to try to be up as much as you can during the daylight hours to help you sleep through the evening hours. So basically, the basic sleep hygiene is having a consistent routine, a fixed wake-up time, prioritize your sleep. Just make it as important as anything else that you're doing throughout that day. Having that 30-minute wind down period before bed. You want to have an electronic device free time frame. So however tempting it is to look at your phone or look at the computer, you really want to try to avoid that 30 minutes before bed because you're just stimulating the rods in your eyes to start thinking and processing, and you're kind of counteracting a good sleep pattern. Dim your lights in your room or black out your room if you're able to as well, or feel comfortable doing that. So in terms of stress and anxiety, we really want to decrease that stress hormone cortisol, which I know you've all heard about. So when we're stressed, cortisol goes up, and we want to find ways to help bring that stress hormone down. So exercising, so this is very repetitive if you picked up on that a lot of these things have all that overlap. And just to show how important that it is, in terms of reducing the stress in your life, is exercise. Again, looking at yoga, Tai Chi, and Qigong all as part of exercise. So again, whether you're running or hiking or going to the gym, but specifically these mind-body exercises can be helpful for stress management. The nutrition, reducing sugar, alcohol, caffeine, mindfulness, breath work, essential oils. So we have so lavender, bergamot, if that's something you like or you want to explore. I have patients that keep it in their pocket, in their purse, and when they're feeling anxious or a bit of nausea, if they're having nausea, they whip out their essential oil and just start breathing it, and it helps to calm them down. Social support, ask people for help. So if you're feeling overwhelmed, there's too much going on, ask people to help, make dinner for you, or to take you to an appointment, or just to come over and be with you, or to go to the movie, or whatever it is, or through your church. But that social support, knowing that you have that connectedness, helps reduce that sense of kind of isolation and stress and anxiety that patients or people can have as they're going through cancer therapy. And speaking of therapy and counseling, whether you're able to be under the guidance of Brittany and her helping with those referrals, or her helping you one-on-one, that's also really important in terms of kind of honing in on ways in which you can help reduce your stress, or talk about the things that are making you stress and causing anxiety. Music therapy, there's a lot of apps on your phone. Have them on your phone. If you're feeling anxious, if you don't want to do the breath work kind of stuff, put on music that makes you feel better. Just have a playlist ready to go, and some song that kind of zaps you out of feeling that stress and anxiety that might be coming on. Or before you come to the clinic, if you're in the midst of therapy, put some music on that you like, put your essential oils in your pocket or whatever the case is, and kind of go in with those tools to help reduce the stress and anxiety of going to the to get your chemotherapy. Or for mammograms, I have patients where every year when their mammogram comes up, they're massively stressed for the week before. And this would be a good time for that week leading up to it. Plan some fun, distracting things, music therapy, do some breath work to help kind of reduce that stress for that few days leading up before that scan or imaging that you're going to have done. If you're an organizer, type A personality, make lists, organize, plan ahead. That in and of itself can help reduce stress and anxiety with all the things that are going on. So if that works for you, do that. And again, this is not everything is for everybody. This is so individualized, and picking what things really work for you. Evaluate your medication list. If you're on steroids for one reason or another with whatever regimen you're on, sometimes just reducing the steroids is an option, something that can be done. So talk to your doctor about the potential of seeing if the steroids can be reduced, if that's an option for you. Spirituality is not just a religion. For many it is. It's going to church, but for some it's just, surfing and being in the ocean, or it's, looking at a mountain range on your travel through the Alps or something of that nature. So whatever spirituality is for you, engaging at can help bring us a reduction in stress as well. And really just focusing on what's in your control and trying not to worry about what's not in your control, is hopefully your medical team will be taking care of that. And we want you to have the tools of being able to help take care of yourself and have your own strength through this. So the last couple of things here, so complementary medicine. So use these in conjunction with your cancer treatments, whether it's acupuncture, which can help treat anxiety, peripheral neuropathy, pain, or nausea. Ayurvedic medicine, which is the concept of universal connectedness, but it also focuses on, guess what, nutrition, meditation, and exercise, yoga. Yoga itself can help with anxiety, depression, sleep, fatigue, and energy. Mind-body classes can help with all of these things. Reiki or healing touch, mindfulness classes, sound bath classes, aromatherapy, breath awareness, all of these things can be helpful along with your cancer treatment and for after your cancer treatment as well. Forest bathing comes from Japan, and it's the idea of just kind of walking through a forest. And although we don't really have a forest in our backyard, and we certainly have the beach or some hills or some nice hikes, and just going on a hike outside, just kind of taking in your surroundings, and finding that kind of connectedness with the planet or with the ground is sometimes just very centering and helpful as well. Conventional referrals. So this is where, again, you still have this control. Just because you come into your doctor's appointment for 10 minutes and they look at labs, they do a physical exam, and you're out checking, making your next appointment in 6 months, you have the opportunity or option to ask for these things. It may not come up automatically from your doctor and his practitioner standpoint, but you bring it up. If you're having difficulty with balance and strengthening, or you feel like you need help with those things, ask for a referral to a physical therapist. If you are worried about developing lymphedema, or I think you might be developing lymphedema or hand joint pain from the aromatase inhibitors, ask for a referral for occupational therapy where they have people trained to help with those kinds of things. Ask for a referral to a dietitian if you're trying to lose weight or get your sugars under better control. Ask for a mental health referral to a social worker, psychology, psychiatry. Ask for what the local support groups are, whether it's through Brittany or through the cancer support community. Ask for a cancer rehab physician referral. We have someone that comes from Cedars twice a month who just helps with any symptoms after cancer therapy. Ask for a cardio-oncology physician appointment. So there's a cardio-oncology specialty where cardiologists are specialized in oncology, and you don't actually have to have a heart problem to see them. If you had any kind of cancer therapy, especially any of those that were cardiotoxic, you can see these doctors for just kind of a cardio wellness type of exam, and they can evaluate everything. Or if you're just worried because you have a family history, ask for an exercise therapist referral. There are, other than exercise therapists at a gym, there are ones that are specialized in cancer therapy or chronic illness specifically, so they're more in tune with how to help people with any kind of chronic illness or cancer. So ask your medical provider for these actual referrals. This is not something you have to wait for them to bring up. So I just want to really hone in on the idea that it's finding what works for you, it's finding what's best for you. Everybody is so different and so unique, and choose and pick what is best for you and works the best for you, so that you're the captain of your own ship, and we're your mates on the captain to help you through this journey, whether it's through the treatment or after. But it's so individualized. And on that note, giving you back to Brittany.
Thank you so much, Susan, and thank you guys for your attention. Maybe we could just take a moment here. I know whenever we're transitioning, give yourself a good stretch. Reach your arms overhead if that's safe and comfortable for you. Maybe you bring one ear to your shoulder and the opposite ear to the opposite shoulder. I feel like, again, sitting is the new smoking. It's so hard. We're in terrible work situations that require us to sit. So, and we're telling you to sit right now. So whatever you need to do, get your wiggles out, just to kind of transition into the next stage. So that we can keep the ball moving in a different direction. So I'm going to be talking now about the mind-body coping skills that can help with getting you back in, right? Like what's in your control and what you can handle. Susan gave an amazing overview on coping with stress and anxiety and literally, as she said, all of the things that she mentioned, from nutrition to exercise, are going to also impact your mental health positively. So again, the beauty, I recently saw a lecture on integrative health, and they were saying, like, we used to have this way of looking at the body and like kind of like we picture like a stick figure, and like, okay, you go to a cardiologist for your heart, you go to a podiatrist for your foot. Like, we look at each system so specialized. But the good thing about like the integrative health is that we see the whole person, right? It's like everything we're telling you to do is going to benefit every part of your body, every organ. It's going to impact the cells, it's going to impact your mind. So what I'm trying to say is they're overlapping because it's all inclusive of your entire mind, your body, your soul. So and I'm going to be talking about just for a second here is the benefits of mindfulness. So this quote that I have up, why I have this quote while we're talking about mindfulness is because it's from John Kabat-Zinn. He is famous for bringing mindfulness, the concepts of meditation, of Eastern philosophy related to the mind. I believe it was also informed by Tai Chi and other traditions. But he basically brought it from the East to the West to make it simple. Also, this quote, "You can't stop the waves, but you can learn how to surf," I think is like kind of a summary of basically what we're trying to hone in our presentation, but also a mentality of helping you with any stressful situation in your life. So we can't stop, like new information from coming. I mean, our cancer patients are incredible rock stars that I feel, tolerate more highs than lows than, than most people will, but everybody, and not to say everybody has in a short period of time, but everybody has stressors, right? So mindfulness essentially is equipping you to get on the surfboard and to not only get on it and to like struggle so much, but to learn how to relax in the process, make it a little bit less suffering. So mindfulness is basically defined as paying attention to something, to anything really, on purpose, with curiosity and without judgment. So I want to let you know that you could be mindful of anything, you could be curious of anything, you could be pay attention and focus on your breathing when you're doing the dishes, you could focus on the grapes that you're eating in your food. Actually, a nutritionist I had spoken with before said how important it is when you're eating your healthy, beautiful salad with like all the colors and fruits and veggies to actually be present when that's happening, to digest the food. To properly digest, you actually do have to be present in that experience. So it goes for anything really. The more present we are with all of our bodily sensations or in the flow in the experience, it could really help with coping with stress. So I want to do a little exercise with you because sometimes you're like, okay, that sounds great. It's like, how do I do it? And I want to let you know mindfulness. I took like many classes and it's just practice. It's really practice and it's building a muscle, right? It's just like building your muscle groups with any kind of repetition. Anything you've done that you've learned, there's always a startup. There's always efforting in the beginning. Eventually you start to change the groups in your brain that essentially used to have your automatic reactions of maybe having information and going to fight or flight or freeze mode. But when we practice non-reaction, non-judgment, curiosity repetitively over and over, actually the way our brain associates stressors with the reaction, it changes. It could slow down, it changes. We might tune straight into our breath as opposed to turning into yelling at someone or beating ourselves up, external, internal. That's really the benefit, why it's helpful. And it's important, I want to say, for mindfulness to practice it on a regular basis, just like any skill when you're learning it, because you actually are changing your brain. So plenty of mindfulness apps you could use. I'm just leave you with one to make it simple. I like Insight Timer. They have, sometimes I just set the timer 20 minutes. I just sit in silence, focus on my breathing, you're meditating. They also have a ton of guided relaxations. I personally do a mindfulness exercise, either through mindfulness or prayer app every night. So it really gets me in the right mindset. And to be honest, I usually only meditate for like 2 minutes and then I'm asleep. So something to keep in mind. And I do want to comment really quickly that in Tibetan, the tradition, the mindfulness, the term, it actually translates to heartfulness. So if I could explain what mindfulness is, it's more of a internal concept than actually thinking concept. So if you think of it as a whole body experience, that's essentially what you get to. So if you have a moment here, we're going to practice a little exercise on breath work just to maybe get ourselves into a state of being a little bit less activated. Perhaps we're giving you a lot of information. You may be tuned out. If you are, hello, come back. You may be on overload. You may be super engaged, whatever it is. You know, again, non-judgment. It doesn't matter. We're going to come back. So we're going to observe and we're going to bring it back. That's what mindfulness is. So I want to guide you through box breathing, as Susan said. Really simple, easy to remember. And keeping in mind that you know, if you were to just go sit and meditate right now, that could be really hard. Sometimes we need to de-escalate our stress levels or get our frantic energy out first before we could actually get into those deep states of relaxation. So just a little note, if you notice you're highly anxious when you start to try and meditate and sit, practicing these breathwork skills will engage your pause, your parasympathetic nervous system, discharge that energy that can result from the trauma and the shock of a diagnosis. Also, if you have ADD, ADHD, or if you kind of tend to run on the more hyperactive or fidgety scale, you could also exercise. You could practice some of these. You could jump around, do a little dancing, go for a run, whatever you need to do, and then pair it with your mindfulness and meditation after that. So it kind of discharges your energy. So, all right. We're going to get started with a little exercise here. So I invite you to remove any distractions. To get back into our bodies. If you're sitting on a chair or lying down, it really doesn't matter. You could even do this standing. If you feel tired or sleepy and you want to try something different, maybe try standing so you don't completely fall asleep in this meditation, although falling asleep is not a bad thing. So just take a moment here. I want to teach you how to get into alignment, the value of it. We're just going to take a big breath in our nose, out our mouth, sigh it out, ha, let it go. As we're here, we're going to continue to notice our breath, sipping an inhale through our nose, traveling to the top. And like you're saying the word H-A, ha, let it go out your mouth. One more time, sipping in cool, new, fresh, filtered air through your nose. Holding the breath if possible. Sighing ha long and slow. Now, it's totally optional to have your eyes open or closed. It's a matter of safety and comfort. So play with that for a second, giving yourself permission to have them open or closed if that helps you to remove distraction. And then we're just tuning our awareness into our breath or our anchor. So in a meditation practice, we always want to find what our anchor is going to be. For now, we're going to try focusing on the sensation of the cool inhales flowing through our nose, and the perhaps warmer exhales flowing out our mouth or our nose. And you could add a mantra or phrase like breathe in on your inhale, breathe out on your exhale. Breathe in on your inhale, and breathe out on your exhale. Beautiful. Continuing on your own, an internal mantra. Mantra means mind liberation or a phrase. Continuing in your own cycle to focus your mind on the mantra and your breath and your body. So take a moment here to stack our shoulders over our hips, our ears over our shoulders, and drop our shoulders away from the ears. Extend the crown of our head tall to the sky so that as if you had a string pulling the crown of your head taller to the ceiling. You notice that you're pulling in opposite direction. The crown of your head is going up and your sit bones are going down. And that line of energy between the crown of your head and your sit bones gets longer. You have a solid line from the base of your spine through your cervical spine and out the crown of your head. And notice how simply adjusting our alignment allows us to breathe a little bit more freely. Noticing your breath now. Noticing if your mind has wandered, if it's in story, if it's in the future or the past. When practicing a moment of mindfulness, simply note past or present, future. Note. And see how kindly, if just in this moment, you could bring yourself back Back to the breath, to the inhales. Back to the exhales. Breathing in and breathing out. Breathe in, breathe out. So we're training our mind just like a puppy or little baby, learning their way kindly, with love, and with consistency. So now as you breathe in and breathe out, I invite you to track your inhales, maybe through the sensation of what it feels like in your nose. So bring the clear, clean air through your nose. And to track the sensation of the exhale out the mouth. I'm going to do that one more time. Inhale, starting to follow with your mind's eye and your focus, your awareness of the breath flowing through your nose. With your mind's eye, with your focus, tracking your breath all the way to the bottom of your exhale. You hit that bottom point. We're going to pause. And now we're going to engage in back breathing. So through your nose, we're going to breathe in for a count of 4, 3, 2, 1. Hold your breath. Hold the breath for 4, 3, 2, 1. Sighing it out for 4, 3, 2, 1. Holding the breath at the bottom for 4, 3, 2, 1. Inhaling through the nose, fresh new air. 4, 3, 2, 1. Holding 4, 3, 2, 1. Let it go. 4, 3, 2, 1. Pause. 4, 3, 2, 1. Inhale. 1, 2, 3, 4. Holding. 1, 2, 3, 4. Last exhale for 4, 3, 2, and 1. You're ready. Just take a moment here to take a mental note of what your body feels like now, how your anxiety levels are, how your muscles feel, how your mind is. Just take a picture. Take a moment to just blink your eyes open when you're ready. You can move your head in all directions and just take a moment to come fully back into the present moment. You can bring your fingers together, whatever you need to do to feel fully present. So I know that was just a taste, but I hope it's a tool for you as well. Now that you're maybe in a different state, I'll take your time to continue to arrive until you're all the way back in the room. But essentially, I want to encourage you to, know that when we could come back to these states of stillness, quiet, they're a reset, right? So we're going to get overwhelmed. It's going to happen. But how can we recalibrate? How can we come back to that pure space on the inside that wants our body to come to a state of equilibrium? Because that's what our body wants to do. That's what it's trying to do. So when you do get overwhelmed, it's going to happen. Practice your mindfulness, practice your breath work. Also, we want to encourage you to talk to us, right? Like, don't be shy. So when you're overwhelmed, when you don't know how to come back to balance, or if you do and you just have questions, write down any of your questions. That's what this slide is about. It's writing down questions, bringing them to appointments. If you have questions about, anything pertaining to your medical care or otherwise, I'm happy to say that at least at Torrance Memorial, I feel like our physicians are very inclusive of the whole person. Remembering to take care of yourself. Susan went over a lot of this. Good social support. Also, I want to encourage you to continue to have an open relationship with your healthcare providers. I know there's some that you're going to click with more than others. But just trying to do your best to practice good communication, to advocate for yourself, to find those providers you really connect with, and to be open. Increase self-care around anniversaries, surgeries, diagnosis, and other milestones related to your cancer diagnosis. So take care of yourself and just know that triggers will come up. It's all about how we recover. So now I know that we're just at the end of the presentation, but before we go to questions, I'd like to take a moment to have you self-reflect on, we gave you a ton of information, a ton of different things to think about, and maybe you wrote down notes, maybe you didn't. This lecture is recorded, but what do you want to take away? Like, just take 1 minute to reflect on whether it was one tip. I mean, Susan gave incredible things to latch onto, both tips as well as examples. I know I'm already like adding nuts to my everything in my mind, in my kitchen, but what do you want to take away? Does something strike you in the emotional category, and spiritual, intellectual, physical, or otherwise social? So if you want, actually, I mean, if there's not a ton of questions, I think it might even be great to drop one commitment you have into the chat. You can drop your commitment in just to hold you accountable. You also could just write emotional or spiritual or whatever, like is a category you want to focus on. If you have a very specific, like I'm gonna, go to Sprouts now and explore new grains, that could be fun too. But it might be fun just for the sake of your own commitment as well as the support of this group to drop something in the chat, and questions as well. So you're welcome. All right, thank you guys.
Thank you so much, Brittany and Susan. We do have a question in the chat. Can lymphedema be reduced or reversed? If you're able to speak about this.
Unfortunately, it can't be reversed. Once it starts, it's there to stay. It's to what degree. It can be really mild, it can be really significant. So it's the importance is reducing the risk is the regular upper body exercise for that collateral circulation, not being obese, overweight, and avoiding the potential for any kind of infection to occur in terms of preventing it. But once it starts, it's really about managing it. And I've had some patients where it's so mild they barely need to wear a sleeve, and for others it's so large they can't even fit into a sleeve. But it's just managing at that point going forward, keeping it under control so that it doesn't get bigger and that it doesn't cause infections on the skin. That's why it's important to see the lymphedema therapist as soon as you're starting to have any symptoms to manage that right away.
Thank you so much, Susan. Are there any other questions? We have Heather who's going to do forest bathing. I am jealous.
That's actually what came up for me too.
Nice. And there's I think I didn't say it, but there's urban walking or urban bathing or whatever. But just the idea of doing it even in the city, even with a lot being stimulated by everything around us, but still kind of just being in your own space as you're taking what's around you and walking through Torrance or wherever you live.
Yes, and I want to share again that this workshop is being recorded. So if you would like a copy of the recording so you can rewatch it again, or at a later point take the screenshots, you can email me. I added my email address into the chat, so I can send that to you. Any other questions? Last questions?
Or any other commitments?
Marina, did you have something?
Yes, I have a question. Is there any statistics that supports the idea that the right attitude and doing all the right things that you talked about really affects the outcome of the disease?
I'll speak about attitude just in terms of what I know, and if Susan wants to pop in, but I actually used to work with a psychiatrist that really actually this was his whole thing, and talked about cognitive behavioral therapy and attitude and how it impacts the cancer patient, and it really does help with attitude, and your mentality does impact your stress levels. It also impacts our cortisol level, impacts our immune response, it impacts our ability to repair our cells to get good sleep, which is all part of the healing process in the body. Also, treatment adherence is a very important byproduct of these of the attitude piece, because people that don't attend to their mental health, that don't process their emotions, are actually more likely to get the cancer-related post-traumatic stress disorder, which can be so triggering that you get so anxious about the trauma of a diagnosis and what you went through that people may even avoid follow-ups. They may be so afraid of what they, unprocessed emotions, that they may not get their mammograms, they stay away. So I think most people here are probably more proactive than your average person, because by virtue you're in a lecture, but there's definitely evidence that your outlook does improve. It's not the same for everybody. Like, we can't say it's like curative, but it does improve also quality of life in the process.
That's very true. Thank you.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much. It is 3 o'clock.
So we will be ending this workshop, and I want to thank again Susan and Brittany for being here with us today and for everyone for joining us.